When I first got started as a Salesforce architect, I always wondered, what the heck is an ESB? I heard these words being thrown around all the time: ESB, point-to-point, MuleSoft, and exactly what they really meant. If you were just like me and you were wondering what all these things mean, then just stay tuned. Hi, my name is Matt Myers, and I frequently like to talk about Salesforce, Salesforce security, and Salesforce best practices. It is my goal to help 1,000 Salesforce developers and architects become experts in the Salesforce ecosystem, advance their career, and get paid. So what is an ESB and what is point-to-point? ESB stands for Enterprise Service Bus. No, and this is not like a bus that you take when you're going to school. This is a different type of bus. What an ESB is a way to help handle different types of integrations, and it does a number of different things with these integrations. There are typically two ways to do integrations in an enterprise. The first way is what is called point-to-point. What point-to-point is when you have one integration or one system connecting directly to another system. For example, let's say I have an application where I need to insert leads into Salesforce. So what I would do is I would take and build an integration from my application directly to Salesforce to insert leads. But let's say someone else has another application, they also need to insert leads. So they create their own integration to insert leads. And before you know it, you have 20, 30, 40, even hundreds of applications or integrations that are doing the exact same thing. This is the problem with point-to-point, is there is no reusability. And also with point-to-point, if a point-to-point integration fails, there's no types of retries and other things. Plus you have to handle a bunch of things such as the authentication. The big advantage of an ESB is that with an ESB, it creates the ability to have reusable integrations. So for example, I could create an API to insert leads to Salesforce, insert contacts to Salesforce, update a lead in Salesforce. And now every time that somebody needs to insert or update a lead in Salesforce, an API already exists for that. The other interesting thing about an ESB is you don't only can have one integration, but you can create multiple integrations, and which is called an integration orchestration, that do multiple things. For example, I have one API that is a public-facing API that a developer could connect to send some lead information. Maybe on that API, I might do some validation. And then from there, I might have another API where I do something else. Entire integration orchestration is calling 3 or 4 separate APIs to get that lead into Salesforce. But as far as the developer knows, he's only calling a single API. And that's what the power of an ESB is. It allows for the front-end developer who's consuming the API, all they know is they're calling a single API, but then allows you to have multiple APIs that allows you to do multiple different things that are required, such as business logic, validation, before it goes to the final system. And typically there's multiple layers to these APIs. The front end where the developer is calling is called the experience layer. From there, it's called the process layer, and that's where you're doing business logic. And last is called the system layer. And that's where you're doing more system APIs. That's your transactional APIs, such as inserting the leads, updating the leads in Salesforce. Other things that an ESB can do, for example, is transformation. Let's say you have one API that accepts the format of XML, but the final API, like Salesforce, only accepts JSON. Well, the ESB can also do different types of transformations to transform the payload that's being sent from an XML format to a JSON format, or could even do other types of logic to that data. Maybe it needs to even have different fields that need to be added that weren't there in the original request, like date timestamps or transaction IDs. So that's the power of the ESB, is you're doing multiple different types of transformations as possible, in addition just to connecting to multiple APIs. And then the last major point I want to call up as far as an ESB is you can do authentication and have different types of limiting factors on the API itself. For example, let's say you want to IP restrict the API and you want to have an authentication using OAuth of the API. Instead of having to develop your own OAuth or authentication measures and IP restriction handlers, the ESB can handle that as well. If you were just doing this in point-to-point, you would have to do all of this stuff yourself. You have to develop your IP restrictions, then you would have to develop your authentication, and then you would have to figure out connecting it to all these different APIs, and then finally the API to Salesforce and all the logic in between. Then, as we mentioned before, if other people need to use this, they would have to do the same thing, so there's no reusability. So think of an ESB as kind of like methods when you're programming. So you have different methods, and you always want to make sure they're reusable. reusable so that you're not duplicating the same code over and over again. And ESB works the same way. Instead of methods, you're creating APIs that are reusable so you're not having to duplicate the same thing over and over again. The last benefit I like to call in ESB is those changes. So for example, if you made a change to how you need to connect to Salesforce, or maybe insert a lead to Salesforce, and let's say you have 200 different APIs that are doing the same thing. Well, now you have to update 200 different places how you insert a lead to Salesforce. Versus if you're using an ESB, all you'd have to do is only update in one place, and all 200 external connecting to this API would be affected all from one place. Similar if you had a method and you were doing encoding, if you have 200 different other methods calling this method, and then you change the one thing in this method, then those 200 APIs have been affected, and it's much easier change. So let's talk about why would you not want to use an ESB? Well, there's a lot of overhead to an ESB. You need to run the ESB server. You have to make sure it's always up and running, maintaining the server. And so maybe if you're a smaller organization and you don't have that type of support or infrastructure, you might want to do a point-to-point. Or maybe you only have a single use API that you never would reuse it anywhere else. Maybe point-to-point might be a good idea in that case as well. But if you're looking at high number of transactions, lots of reusability, you want to have automatic built-in authentication, limiting other types of orchestrations, and then that's really when you want to use an ESB. I hope this has been very informative to you and hope that clears up that topic about an ESB. Please let me know in the comments below what you thought about this topic, or if anything else you would like to learn. And please make sure that you don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell so you'll be notified next time I post a new video. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video, and I appreciate you and look forward to seeing you in the next video.